you never hear in the media about Pete Carroll's future. Nobody discusses it. Nobody talks about it. It's just always been assumed that he is going to carry on. The only time that hasn't happened was in 2017 when the season was imploding. And then before the final game, Jay Glazer went on Fox and said Pete Carroll might retire. And I think at some point by the end of the day or the next day, Pete Carroll had tweeted out saying he wasn't going anywhere and the rest history. He reset the team, yada, yada, yada. So this is really the first time in 6 years that we've had any talk whatsoever of Pete Carroll not being the Seattle Seahawks coach. But it's exploded in the last 24 hours. So Albert Breer does a mailbag. He's asked a question by somebody. Is Pete Carroll going to be the Seahawks coach in 2024? And he has answered, suggesting that he is hearing otherwise. And it has, to a certain degree, snowballed a bit from there. And I want to talk about that. But the first thing I wanted to talk about before I get into all of that with Albert Breer is I was listening to KJ Wright on 710, and he said some really close to the bone things. This is not unusual. This is not usual for someone who is, as far as I'm aware, has been working for the organization and has clearly got some kind of connection with Pete Carroll. But he was saying the players aren't listening to the message, or he was suggesting that the players are thinking about themselves and their own interests. The players don't give a damn what Carroll's saying, that Carroll needs to send a message and isn't producing enough accountability, that the players don't have Carroll's back, that it sounded as if Carroll was sick of the players, or at least some of them. And I'm listening to all that, and I'm thinking this is starting to sound like 2009 when the three receivers, Dion Branch, I think it was Nate Burleson, and TJ Hushmanzada went on, I think it was KJR, and basically said a load of stuff that, that was not complimentary of the setup in Seattle. And it was the beginning of the end for Jim Mora. And I'm listening to KJ Wright talking about this. I'm thinking, I'm getting flashbacks to this. So you jump on a day, and then you've got Albert Breer doing a mailbag talking about Pete Carroll's future. So this is what he said. I'd say I'm less sure of it than I have been in recent years. Going into this year, it sure looked like the Seahawks are creeping closer towards having the kind of core group of players they did in Carroll's early years, with a very solid 2022 draft class coming back and the 23 class bursting with promise. Now they're 6-7 heading into a matchup against the NFC champion Eagles, who are coming off consecutive losses. So while Seattle remains loaded with young talent, it's fair to ask how far away they might be from a championship and where they stand at quarterback after this year. Because while coming into this year, I thought that infusion of young talent might keep Carroll around for a long while. If the coach doesn't think that he's close, it could alter his decision on returning for next season, during which he'll turn 73. And the idea that Seattle would try to get Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, who was Seattle's DC for its 2 Super Bowl trips a decade ago, if Carroll were to retire, has been floated around a little, which the Seahawks could do a lot worse than that if this were to be it. So that is what Albert Breer has said. It is speculative. There's no point pretending. He's not a report in this. He's speculating that maybe for the first time since 2017, that's my insertion there because that's when we last heard it from Jay Glazer, that Pete Carroll might be thinking about retiring. So that in itself warranted an article, which I've written on SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Go and check it out, about the suitability of Dan Quinn and whether there's anything in this. I then stuck on KJR for some late night listening and listened to the Puck and Jim show. And they played a segment from Breer discussing this on the radio show where he, mentioned this again, the Dan Quinn connection, the possibility of Carroll leaving. And they then had Mike Garafolo on from the NFL Network, who, like Breer, very respected reporter, has got connections to Seattle. And he came on and said, I've got a segment of it here. This is one of the quotes from Mike Garafolo. I'm picking up what Breer's putting down. The Seattle-Dallas game is where I was really hearing a lot of that. Don't be surprised if this all falls into place. Carroll leaving, Quinn coming in. I believe that some people think this could be the end for sure, depending on how this finishes up down the stretch. Now, Garofalo went on to say that John Schneider's in no danger whatsoever, that he feels this is a firing thing rather than a retiring thing, that he doesn't think Carroll would walk away. So that kind of contradicts Albert Breer's message. I think if when Carroll ever does leave, I don't think it'll ever be announced as Pete Carroll has been fired. I think the team will show a bit more respect than that. And unless Carroll says, no, you either fire me or you let me crack on, and it comes out that way, I suspect it might be more of a mutual parting than a firing. But just the point is to be sort of sat here 4 games before the end of the season and to have 2 people like Albert Breer and Mike Garafolo talking about the possibility of Pete Carroll not coaching the Seahawks anymore is a thing that warrants a discussion, because we don't have this before. We have just general sort of fan debates and discussions. Could this happen? Probably not. Should we talk about it anyway? Yeah, why not? Some people then get upset about that. But to have these 2 reporters talking about it adds a layer of validity to the conversation. You have to sort of sit up and take notice. And sort of my conclusion from all this, I'm going to sort of give a thought on Dan Quinn in a second, is that I think really the next 4 games are going to be critical. Like, you know, if the Seahawks win 3 of these next 4, make the playoffs, the chances are that Pete Carroll is not going to be fired. Whether he decides to carry on or not, who knows? But if they get to the playoffs, it might just be status quo remains. If they miss out on the playoffs, maybe this is going to happen. Maybe after 14 years, the Seahawks will move on. Andy Reid got 13 years in Philadelphia, won 130 games. Pete Carroll's been in Seattle for 14 seasons. He's won 134. Nothing lasts forever. Carroll's 73. If his contract runs to 2025, if that's the end anyway, if you do not believe that Pete Carroll is going to win a Super Bowl for you in 2024 and 2025 or 2025, then you might as well make the move now. If that's the end line for Carroll and you do not believe under Carroll the team will win a Super Bowl, you have to make a change. Doesn't matter what's happening with ownership. Doesn't matter if you do intend to sell the team within the next 2 years. If you are the custodian of the Seattle Seahawks franchise and you do not believe that Pete Carroll can win a Super Bowl in the next 2 seasons because they ain't going to win one this year, then what's the point of going through the next 2 years? You're wasting time. If you do not think the coach will win, you move on if he's only got 2 years left. And I would suggest that given that he's approaching his mid-70s, he hasn't got another 5 years in him, really. Let's be honest. It just does feel as if things are coming to the natural end. And the only thing that can stop them actually be coming to an end is a great run to end the season. And frankly, I am not interested in a false dawn. Doesn't mean I want the Seahawks to lose. Doesn't mean I'm going to be sat there rooting for the Eagles on Monday or the Titans or the Cardinals or the Steelers. No. I'm also not going to be crying myself to sleep if they lose these games. Because a false dawn at this point could be the worst thing. And this is why I don't like making decisions on if a win here, keep, if a loss here, dump. No, you've got to make a decision. And I hope that the people in Seattle are mature enough to do that and sensible enough to go, have we lost faith? Yes, well, let's just move now rather than 2025. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But it's interesting it's being talked about. As for Dan Quinn, look, it's not an exciting name. You know, I can remember as someone who remembers 2009 fondly, I wanted Jim Mora done after 1 year. It was obvious that was not going to work out and I wanted him gone. And when he went, I can remember where I was when I saw the news. This is before Twitter. It was on a little Roto World tracker thing on the old format of the blog, and it said, Jim Mora has been fired. And I was like, I can remember this bump. I was a freelance journalist at the time working for the BBC. Very excited. Couldn't wait to get home and just think about that. And then it emerged within the next half an hour to an hour that Pete Carroll was the guy they wanted. And I was, exciting. You know, big name, Pete Carroll, USC, big reputation. I was intrigued. I liked the hire. I was willing to give it a go. I know some people weren't. I loved the hire. And it was flashy and it was bold and it was interesting. Hiring Dan Quinn will not be of that nature. It just won't. It'd be a safe, solid pick. You could introduce Dan Quinn to the fans. Some people go, do you know what? I wish they'd appointed an offensive coach. And others will just go, oh, Dan Quinn, I remember him. No one's going to be getting the torches and the pitchforks out. They'll bill it as there'll be some kind of continuity there. I don't think that's the best thing. I think you need a clean break, frankly. But they could pitch that as a positive. He does know the team. He knows the franchise. He has experience being a head coach before. I do think there is some benefit to that to an extent. I mean, obviously, if you just fail, then the chances are they might just fail again. Josh McDaniels, a good point of that. But he did take a team to the Super Bowl. And I know that I appreciate that Kyle Shanahan had a massive part to play in that. But he was still the head coach who made a Super Bowl, should have won a Super Bowl. And if it wasn't for the play calling of Kyle Shanahan, funnily enough, at the end of that Super Bowl, when they should have just run the ball instead they were throwing it at the end, if they'd just run the ball, they would have won the Super Bowl. They wouldn't have given New England a chance, probably, to steal that one. So he has had some success. He knows what success looks like. And of course, he has been in Seattle when they've had success. His Dallas teams have had success, Dallas defenses. 6th in DVOA this year, 4th the 2 previous years. Yes, Micah Parsons is a huge reason for that generational talent. But if you actually look through the roster and the PFF grades, and I've noticed, Adijizu was like a top 5 interior defensive lineman under Dan Quinn. DeMarcus Lawrence has got a grade in the 90s. Deron Bland's turned into a sensation with interceptions. He's got a 90 grade via PFF. Malik Hooker is a top 10 safety via PFF. They've got a top 10 linebacker on the roster. Like, the defense is performing very well. And it's possible that Mike Parsons just elevates everybody to be brilliant. But, do we have to give the defensive coordinator some credit as well? And if he can come in and get the offensive coordinator role right, and if, unlike Carroll, he's willing to go, right, you deal with the offense. It's your baby. I'll coach defense. You coach offense to a really good offensive coordinator, then this can work. The problem is that how many good offensive coordinators are there out there? The good offensive coordinators are already calling plays for other teams or their head coaches. Like the line of good upcoming play caller types who've done it before is very thin because the league is in demand for offensive coaches at the minute. So what do you do? I mean, you'd hope that Dan Quinn would have put some thought into this in the preparation of becoming a head coach again, and he will have done. But it will be intriguing to see how it works. I mean, personally, what's my dream scenario? Go and get your own McShay, your own Shanahan, draft a quarterback, go down that road. I've written an article, which I haven't published, detailing candidates that I think should consider, and Dan Quinn was on the list, but everyone else was an offensive coach. And that is, the way that I'd ideally go down if Carroll leaves. But I also can't say, as much as I wouldn't be ecstatic, overjoyed, jumping out my seat if Dan Quinn is hired, I also wouldn't be crying myself to sleep. I would not be upset by the hire. I'd go, okay, let's see how it goes. Because it would be change, and provided he didn't just keep all of the Carroll staff and essentially just try to be Carroll. If he was his own man with his own staff and his own ideas, and it was a clean break and a fresh start, I'd be intrigued to see what happens there. But that's the talk. The other talk was that maybe Dan Quinn would replace Matt McCarthy if things went wrong this year. It hasn't. Dallas looked great. Garofalo said in his radio hit earlier, Matt McCarthy ain't going anywhere, whatever happens between now and the end of the season. So he isn't taking that job. And the Seahawks opening would be, you would imagine, appealing to Dan Quinn, given he knows the franchise. And it's a great franchise. Like, you can't, whatever people think about the ownership situation or some of the issues under Carroll recently, it's a great franchise. It's a great place to work, great place to live, great setting. It would be very appealing to a lot of different teams. So there we are. What do you make of it? Let me know in the comments section. I have to admit, look, when serious reporters like Garofalo, like Albert Breer are talking about this, when people within the league are talking about this, things just seem to be trending a certain way. And if the Seahawks don't make the playoffs, maybe it will be the start of a new era. Like I say, let me know what you think in the comment section. Like the video, always helps, as does leaving a comment. It also really helps subscribing. So subscribe to the channel. Check out SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. Until next time, bye for now.